How does a man, formally trained at the prestigious Royal College of Music, a student steeped in the hallowed traditions of classical piano, become not just a rock star, but a veritable wizard of rock and roll? A caped crusader of the keyboard who would redefine the very role of his instrument within the genre. How does a prodigy of the ivories trade the polite applause of the recital hall for the thunderous roar of stadiums, surrounded by a fortress of electronic instrumentation that looked more like the cockpit of a starship than a musical setup? This is not merely a question of career change, it is a question of revolution, and at the heart of it stands the towering, larger-than-life figure of Richard Christopher "Rick" Wakeman. To understand his greatness is to understand a pivotal moment in music history, when ambition, virtuosity, and technology collided to create something the world had never heard before, shattering the established hierarchy of rock instrumentation, and proving that the 88 keys could be as mighty, as ferocious, and as heroic as the 6 strings of an electric guitar. Let's be brutally honest from the outset. In the landscape of late 1960s rock and roll, the keyboard was often treated as the dutiful, unassuming sibling to the rebellious, charismatic guitar. It provided harmonic support, a bit of textural color, a foundational chord structure for the real stars to soar over. There were, of course, brilliant pioneers wrestling the growling Hammond organ into submission, like John Lord of Deep Purple, or mavericks like Keith Emerson who were beginning to stab and abuse their instruments with a punk rock fury before punk even existed. But the keyboardist was rarely the hero, the gunslinger, the focal point of the audience's adoration. The blinding spotlight was firmly, almost exclusively, fixed on the pyrotechnic guitarist and the Dionysian frontman. Then, along came a generation of players who refused to be relegated to the background, players who saw the keyboard not as a supporting piece of furniture, but as a command center for sonic exploration. Chief among them, and arguably the most flamboyant, classically adept, and conceptually audacious, was Wakeman. His genius, and the reason his name is still uttered with such reverence, is not a single attribute but a perfect storm of 4 interconnected forces: a peerless classical technique, a visionary embrace of new technology, a compositional ambition of breathtaking scale, and a flair for sheer unadulterated showmanship that was second to none. First and foremost, one must contend with the formidable foundation of Wakeman's classical training. This was not a guitarist who learned a few chords on the piano to flesh out a song. This was a concert-trained pianist of immense potential who chose rock as his primary medium of expression. His father, a pianist himself, instilled in him a love for the instrument, and from the tender age of 7, Rick was immersed in rigorous classical studies. This journey led him to the Royal College of Music, an institution that demands technical perfection and a deep understanding of music theory, harmony, and history. This rigorous education gave him a command of the instrument that was simply on another plane from most of his rock contemporaries, who were largely self-taught and rooted in the blues. Wakeman's fingers didn't just play notes, they danced, they flew. They attacked the keys with a precision, speed, and articulation that was nothing short of breathtaking. You can hear it in the cascading arpeggios that sound like waterfalls of sound, the complex contrapuntal lines where multiple melodies intertwine, and the intricate, harmonically sophisticated solos that became his unmistakable trademark. He possessed a musical fluency that allowed him to think and compose with a palette of colors largely unavailable to musicians working solely within the pentatonic box of rock and blues. While others were channeling Chuck Berry, Wakeman was drawing from the romantic drama of Chopin, the fiendish difficulty of Liszt, and the epic emotional weight of Rachmaninoff. This classical underpinning is the very bedrock of his entire musical edifice. It lent his playing a sense of structure, narrative drama, and harmonic gravitas that elevated the music of the bands he played with, transforming what could have been simple rock songs into miniature symphonies. He wasn't just playing rock and roll on a piano. He was fundamentally fusing the DNA of European classical music with the raw energy and amplified volume of modern rock. This was a critical distinction. It meant he understood voice leading, harmonic tension and release, and orchestral texture in a way that allowed him to build, rather than simply play over, a song's structure. However, this formal training was welded to a deeply ingrained rebellious streak. Accounts from his time at the Royal College of Music paint a picture of a student who was often profoundly bored by the rigid, dogmatic curriculum, far more interested in interpreting the classics with his own flamboyant flair than in achieving sterile academic perfection. He famously quipped that he was asked to leave after prioritizing a pub session over a serious practice. This tension between discipline and rebellion is absolutely central to his sound and his appeal. He had the technical chops to flawlessly execute a Bach fugue, but he possessed the soul of a rock star who wanted to make the floor shake and the crowd roar. This duality made him an incredibly sought-after session musician, even before he found global fame. His work in this period is a masterclass in versatility. He was the man behind the iconic, deceptively simple piano introduction and accompaniment on Cat Stevens's Morning Has Broken, a performance of delicate, hymn-like beauty that stands in stark contrast to his later prog rock epics. It showed he understood restraint and the power of a simple, perfect melody. This chameleon-like ability to adapt made him indispensable. He laid down the unforgettable and haunting mellotron textures that give David Bowie's Space Oddity its otherworldly atmosphere. He returned to work with Bowie on the Hunky Dory album, contributing the brilliant cascading piano that drives Life on Mars and the jaunty, almost vaudevillian piano on Changes. Wakeman himself has called Hunky Dory one of the finest collections of songs he ever had the privilege of playing on, a testament to his respect for great songwriting. His session discography from this era is staggering. He played with T-Rex Elton John, and even improbably lent his mini-moog skills to Black Sabbath for the track Sabra Cadabra, proving he could hang with the heaviest of bands. These weren't just gigs to pay the bills. They were formative experiences where he honed his craft, learning to apply his immense talent to the concise, impactful world of the 3-minute pop or rock song. This discipline of serving the song, learned in the trenches of London's recording studios, would prove invaluable, preventing his later, more expansive works from devolving into pure self-indulgence. Of course, the chapter of his career that truly cemented his legend and unleashed the full scope of his talent was his tenure with the progressive rock band Yes. When he joined in 1971 to replace the founding keyboardist Tony Kaye, it was an alchemical reaction, the final perfect ingredient added to an already potent brew. Yes was already a band of formidable world-class musicians, collectively pushing the boundaries of rock music with labyrinthine arrangements, unconventional time signatures, and a level of individual virtuosity that was astonishing. But Wakeman's arrival was the catalyst that propelled them from being a brilliant and complex rock band into the undisputed stratosphere of progressive rock royalty. His predecessor, Tony Kaye, was a fine and tasteful organist, a player deeply rooted in the powerful, blues-inflected sound of the Hammond organ. Wakeman, however, didn't just bring an instrument, he brought an entire orchestra. It was on the 1971 album Fragile that the world was properly introduced to the full Wakeman sonic signature, and the band's sound exploded from black and white into dazzling panoramic technicolor. Here, we must address the second pillar of his greatness, his role as a technological pioneer and sonic architect. Wakeman didn't just play keyboards, he embraced, mastered, and popularized the new electronic instruments that were revolutionizing music in the early 1970s. He famously surrounded himself on stage with a U-shaped fortress of them, a setup that was as visually stunning as it was musically essential. This wasn't just for show, it was a functional necessity for realizing the orchestral vision in his head. In this arsenal, he had his acoustic grand piano for those moments of classical flourish and dynamic subtlety. He had the trusty Hammond B3 organ, the undisputed king of rock keyboards, for that majestic quasi-ecclesiastical roar that could fill a stadium. He had a Fender Rhodes or Wurlitzer electric piano for a funkier bell-like tone, and a Hohner clavinet for percussive, rhythmic parts. But his true weapons of choice, the instruments that defined his sound and that of an era, were the synthesizers and the mellotron. The mellotron, a quirky, tape-based keyboard that was notoriously unreliable, became a cornerstone of the classic progressive rock sound. Each key triggered a length of magnetic tape containing a pre-recorded sound, often strings, flutes, or a choir. In Wakeman's hands, this instrument allowed him to summon ethereal string sections and haunting, ghostly choirs, providing the lush, atmospheric beds over which the band's intricate music could unfold. More importantly, he was one of the earliest and most effective champions of the Mini-Moog synthesizer. This compact, monophonic instrument, which could only play one note at a time, was a wild beast to tame. It was a new language, with a vocabulary of oscillators, filters, and envelopes. Wakeman learned to speak this language with unparalleled fluency. He coaxed searing, aggressive, guitar-like solos from it, sounds that were futuristic, otherworldly, and utterly new to the rock idiom. He mastered the art of manipulating its pitch bend and modulation wheels in real time, giving his solos a dynamic, expressive, almost vocal quality that few could match. He could make it scream, cry, and sing. His keyboard rig was not a collection of similar sounds. It was a collection of distinct voices, and he conducted them like a one-man orchestra, moving with practiced ease from one keyboard to another to introduce new textures, counter-melodies, and blistering lead lines. Listening to tracks like Roundabout or the epic Heart of the Sunrise from Fragile, you can hear him layering these sounds with an architect's precision, creating a sonic tapestry of incredible depth, color, and complexity. His work on the subsequent album, the monumental Close to the Edge, is arguably the zenith of this period. The 19-minute title track is a sprawling suite where Wakeman's keyboards are not just an accompaniment, but a fundamental part of the composition's architecture. The colossal, awe-inspiring church organ that opens the third section, I Get Up, I Get Down, is one of the most iconic and powerful moments in the history of progressive rock. A sudden blast of sacred grandeur in the middle of a swirling, complex rock epic. This is what made him so good. He wasn't just a soloist waiting for his turn in the spotlight. He was a sonic architect, using his vast array of keyboards to build veritable cathedrals of sound. He understood texture and dynamics in a way few rock musicians did. He knew when to be delicate and atmospheric, and he knew precisely when to unleash the full, terrifying, glorious power of his entire rig. His legendary interplay with guitarist Steve Howe was a conversation between two masters speaking a new, highly evolved language, sometimes weaving intricate lines in perfect harmony, other times engaging in a fiery, competitive duel for supremacy. This relentless creative drive inevitably led to the third pillar of his greatness, his staggering compositional ambition, and the unapologetic grandiosity of his solo work. The very excesses that cynical critics of progressive rock love to mock, the long songs, the classical allusions, the high-minded concepts, are in fact central to Wakeman's artistic identity and a key component of his enduring appeal. While still a member of Yes, he released his first solo album, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, 1973. This was an act of supreme confidence. It was a bold, entirely instrumental concept album, where each track was a musical portrait and interpretation of one of the infamous king's spouses. It was an audacious idea, a head-on fusion of a high-minded historical concept with high-voltage, keyboard-driven progressive rock. Against all commercial logic for the time, the album was a massive success, proving that there was a large audience hungry for complex instrumental music and demonstrating that Wakeman was not just a hired gun in a successful band, but a composer and band leader with a unique and compelling vision. His ambition, however, was only just getting started. After a tumultuous period with Yes, he left the band following the sprawling and contentious double album, Tales from Topographic Oceans, an album he famously found to be indulgent and disconnected, openly eating a curry on stage during performances to show his displeasure. Now, on his own, he unleashed a trio of solo albums that would come to define the very concept of epic in rock music. Journey to the Center of the Earth, 1974, was not just an album, it was a cultural event. Based on the classic Jules Verne novel, it was recorded live at London's Royal Festival Hall with a full symphony orchestra, a choir, a narrator, and his rock band, the English Rock Ensemble. It was bombastic, over-the-top, melodramatic, and utterly, breathtakingly magnificent. This wasn't music for the faint of heart or the cynically inclined. It was music for dreamers, a full-throated, unapologetic embrace of fantasy, literature, and spectacle. Wakeman wasn't just making records. He was creating immersive, cinematic worlds for the listener to get lost in. decades before the term multimedia experience was coined. He followed this triumph with an even more ambitious project, The Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, 1975. The album itself was another tour de force of orchestral rock, blending soaring melodies with powerful rock rhythms. But it was the live presentation of this album that entered the realm of legend, and for some, infamy. Not content with a simple concert, Wakeman mortgaged his own house to finance a staging of the album at Wembley Arena on ice. It was a full-blown ice skating pageant, complete with knights in shining armor, a castle and jousting performers, all while his band and a full orchestra performed the music. It was an act of such audacious, magnificent folly that you either have to dismiss it as the absolute peak of prog rock absurdity or applaud it as an act of pure, unadulterated artistic will. Realistically, it was both, and that is precisely the point. A significant part of Wakeman's greatness lies in his absolute willingness to risk ridicule in the pursuit of a spectacular vision. He believed that this music, his music, deserved a grand stage. He saw it as a form of high art that should be presented with the same reverence and theatricality as grand opera or ballet, but infused with the raw power and visceral energy of a rock show. This refusal to compromise, this damn the torpedoes full speed ahead attitude, is nothing short of inspiring. He wasn't trying to be cool, he was trying to be epic. Finally, we must consider the man himself, the fourth and perhaps most endearing pillar of his greatness, the showman and the personality. Rick Wakeman understood instinctively that rock and roll, especially the stadium-filling variety, is theater. Adorned in his signature shimmering floor-length capes, with his long blonde hair and his towering bank of keyboards that resembled an altar to the gods of electricity, he cut an unforgettable figure on stage. He was the keyboard wizard personified, a musical Merlin conjuring sounds that seemed otherworldly and magical. His stage presence was not just an affectation, it was an extension of the music itself. The music was fantastical, mythical, and larger than life, so the performer had to be as well. He moved with an energy that belied the often stationary nature of his instrument, his arms a blur as he moved from keyboard to keyboard, his body swaying to the rhythm, his face a mask of intense concentration or joyous abandon. He was a performer who commanded your attention, a true star who could hold his own on stage with any strutting frontman or guitar hero. The cape wasn't just a costume, it was a statement of intent, a visual manifestation of the magic he was creating with his fingers. Yet underneath the capes, the grand concepts, and the on-ice extravaganzas, there has always been a refreshingly grounded, witty and self-deprecating individual. His famously sharp pub-honed wit is legendary. Stories abound of his playful, mischievous nature, a stark contrast to the often serious, pseudo-spiritual demeanor of some of his progressive rock contemporaries. He was known to prefer traveling on tour with the rowdier, beer-drinking road crew, or even finding camaraderie with bands like Black Sabbath, finding them more aligned with his own down-to-earth, fun-loving personality. This complete lack of personal pretension, combined with his immense musical ambition, makes him a uniquely compelling and relatable figure. He is the grumpy old rock star of his book titles and television appearances, a man who can tell a hilarious, often off-color story 1 minute, and then, without missing a beat, discuss the finer points of a listitude the next. This genuine humanity prevents his grandiose music from ever feeling sterile or academic. You always feel the presence of a passionate, brilliant, and often mischievous human being at the very heart of the sonic tempest he creates. In the final analysis, Rick Wakeman is a great keyboardist because he is so much more than just a keyboardist. He is a virtuoso who brought a level of classical technique and harmonic understanding to rock that was almost unheard of, giving the genre a new language of sophistication. He is a fearless innovator who harnessed the power of emerging technology, not as a gimmick, but as a tool to expand the sonic possibilities of his instrument and the genre itself. He is a composer of boundless ambition who thought in terms of symphonies and literary sagas, not just 3-minute songs, daring his audience to dream on a grander scale. And he is a consummate showman who understood that music, at its most powerful, should be an overwhelming experience that engages the eyes as much as the ears. He fundamentally refused to allow his instrument to be a polite, background accompaniment. In his capable hands, the keyboard became a weapon, a paintbrush, an orchestra, and a spaceship. He took it from the back of the stage and thrust it directly and unapologetically into the spotlight, making it, and himself, the hero of the story. For that, rock and roll is forever in his debt.